All skin folk ain't kinfolk. We know this. We've always known this. We know it when we see a Black person actively working against the Black community, but we also know it's not always that obvious. We know it's not just a political choice or a different opinion. And some of us understand that beneath that betrayal is internalized anti Blackness. It's self hatred, it's self loathing. But did you know that there is actually a psychological virus that causes it? And our ancestor, Dr. Kobi Kambon, one of the most important Black psychologists of the 20th century, he called it cultural misorientation. And we have a way to measure it. Internalized anti Blackness is the product of one of the most prolonged, far reaching systems of exploitation in history. One that didn't end when slavery was abolished, and it didn't end when Juneteenth finally came around and the rest of us found out that we were free ish, but it kept being sustained in new forms. This virus, understanding it, what it really is, truly understanding it, is the beginning of the antidote. So last week we talked about Black women's rage as a liberation fuel and why they named it in order to tame it. Today we go on interior to the place where the oppression stopped needing to come from outside because we were conditioned, we were programmed to do it to ourselves and literally to hate ourselves from the inside out. Whew. In this video, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to apply Dr. Cambon's analytical framework to three Black women that we all know. Kay Coles James, who's the former president of the Heritage Foundation, the organization behind Project 2025. We're going to look at Condoleezza Rice, former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under George W. Bush, and Candace Owens, the former communications director of Turning Point USA. So we can all see this virus in real life and we can see how it evolves. As we approach another Juneteenth, this time with Jim Crow actively trying to make a comeback, there is no room for playing the middle or riding the fence. It's go time. Before we get into it, though, if you're new here, I am Barbara Ohuninifa. I am an author, a griot, and an ancestral strategist. And as an ancestral strategist, I look to our ancestors and frameworks to understand how we got here and how do we heal so we can move forward. I'm also the founder of Beautiful Powerful Love, which is a storytelling movement for the remembering, healing, and liberation of Black women at a crossroads. If that's your jam, subscribe, ring the bell, share it with another Black woman. Today, we ain't playing. Let's go. So, before we get into the analysis, let's lay a little foundation so you understand the framework that we're going to be using to assess. So, Dr. Kobi Kambon was the professor and chairman of the psychology department at the Florida A&M University, where he built the only African-centered psychology training program at an American college or university. He spent decades developing what he called a Black psychology, rooted in not how white institutions study Black people, but in the actual African personality as something uniquely and ancestrally African. In other words, he viewed it as a Black person looking at Black people. I have a full video on Dr. Kambon covered alongside Dr. Amos Wilson in my Ancestral Activation series, and it's linked below if you want to go deeper and understand more about who this man was. But here's the simplified overview of his work that we're going to use in this video. So, Dr. Kambon's research found that Black people carry, at a very deep level, an inborn orientation towards community, collective survival, and cultural values, something that's passed down generation to generation, and much in the way that any people carries the imprint of their ancestors. When that orientation is intact, when we still understand our place in the world and we're conscious of it, a person identifies as African descendant, carries and cares about the survival and dignity of Black people collectively, and moves through the world with that as a compass point. But don't confuse that awareness of African identity roots with pedestalizing continental African culture versus Black American culture. I just have to add that in. That's a whole different video, but it's very important that we don't bypass our experience here. Cultural misorientation is what happens when centuries of slavery, colonialism, media, education, religion, and social structures and societal structures, and the ongoing white supremacy fallacy wear down that original orientation. And that impacts both those enslaved by Europeans and those colonized by Europeans. And it impacts your self worth and your standards so that you start to look at yourself and evaluate yourself according to these European standards. And again, that happens to both descendants of enslaved Africans and the colonized continental Africans. In its most mild form, it's just living in this world. We've all been exposed. We're all swimming in it. In its most severe form, a person actively works against the Black collective interests while believing they're helping or potentially not caring at all. Dr. Kambon called this a lethal psychological virus that penetrates the African psyche through the brutality and oppressive experience of enslavement and colonialism. And it replicates itself across generations. It didn't just happen one time, it's continued. And it's something that was done to us, and then we do to each other, and oftentimes to ourselves. Sit with that for a minute. He built a tool, the cultural misorientation scale, to help locate where this shows up. And that tool consists of six subscales: materialism, how much you measure success by wealth and status; individualism, how much you center yourself versus your community; alien self, whether you've absorbed the European standards as your own; anti self, whether you've turned that absorption into hostility towards other Black people; self destructive, whether you've normalized harm to yourself or to your community; and integration, whether you believe Black advancement means is defined by proximity to white institutions. Take a breath. I want to show you what these look like on real people. And then I want to talk about the medicine that's the antidote. And it's probably not what you think. But before I go any further, let me just give you a word on what this is and what this is not, so we can be really clear on that. Everything that I'm about to share is drawn from publicly available statements and documents, positions, biographical information. This is all public record. And this is my analysis using Dr. Kambon's framework as the lens. It's not a clinical diagnosis of any of these women we're about to talk about. None of them have taken this assessment. And in Dr. Kambon's work, part of that process is to do a self assessment with this work. And so they have not taken this assessment that I know of. So this is my assessment of them using his framework and publicly available information. I don't claim to know what's in their hearts. It's my interpretation of the patterns offered here so we can recognize and ultimately heal the patterns in ourselves and in our communities, because that's ultimately where we're going. That's ultimately the point. How can we use what we know and what our ancestors have left behind so that we can heal ourselves and continue this movement towards liberation? Because despite Juneteenth being upon us, we still ain't free. We have work to do. All right, let's go. Our first field study is on Kay Coles James, who was born June 1st, 1949. She's 76 years old. And she was born in Virginia and raised in Richmond's segregated public housing. She was the only girl amongst five brothers, and her childhood was filled with poverty. Her father's alcoholism, and she spent time living with relatives within her extended family network after her parents' household was just too unstable for her to stay. At 12 years old, she was one of 26 Black children that desegregated an all white junior high in Richmond. And it was an effort that local newspaper called a major desegregation experiment. The fact that they call it an experiment tells you all you need to know. A white student pushed her down a stone stairway. Her books were kicked across the hall while other students laughed at her. She went through some things, even more trauma on top of the trauma that she was raised in. Mind you, saying that she was raised and her life was marked by poverty, which is a traumatic experience. The father was an alcoholic, which is a traumatic experience. And she had to move into different family households, traumatic experience. And then she goes through that in middle school. So she went on to attend Hampton University and HBCU, So, to be clear, she was a direct beneficiary of the civil rights movement in all ways. But before she even became the Heritage Foundation president, she spent decades inside of major institutions. Two Republican administrations, the George H.W. Bush administration and the George W. Bush administration, daddy and the dumber son, and multiple state government roles, national policy organizations. And then in 2018, she became the first African American and the first woman to serve as president of the Heritage Foundation. Now, pause on that for a moment. The first African American and the first woman. So they didn't get a white woman, they didn't get a black man, they went straight to a black woman. There's a reason for that, and we're going to continue to unpack that. But they know something about who black women are that we have yet to remember, at least fully. Now, the Heritage Foundation, in case you didn't know, that's the organization that developed Project 2025, which is, we just going to call it a conservative blueprint to weaken federal civil rights, eliminate DEI and social safety net programs, and significantly strip federal government's role in addressing racial inequalities and many other mandates. All of this that disproportionately harms Black women and our communities and families. Project 2025 is the new Jim Crow laws coming back. And as soon as the current administration got in office through executive order, they started implementing Project 2025, and it is majority implemented now in 2026. She has publicly framed her appointment to Heritage Foundation as evidence of progress and opportunity for Black Americans. Now, I've applied Dr. Kambon's assessment to her, all six subscales, but I'm only going to highlight one because we'd be here for a while if we went through all of them. I'm going to highlight the one that is the most severe of all the six, and it's the integration orientation, aka the proximity to whiteness gauge. This is Kambon's measure of how much a person believes Black advancement happens through proximity to and acceptance by white institutions. And you can tell pretty much ever since she left Hampton, she's been chasing that ever since. Now, the way Cambone looks at it is that this integration framework or orientation, you focus on your proximity to acceptance, to proximity to the white institutions, versus through building independent Black power. James, and before the Heritage Foundation, before they even entered the picture, she was a textbook example. Decades inside of government and conservative policy infrastructure as an institutional player, state government, two presidential administrations, and then the most influential conservative think tank in the country. Her overall cultural misorientation assessment, despite that, is moderate because she still thinks she's doing something of benefit for us. She still thinks that integration is the key. She's an institutionalist. She retained some African identity markers while organizing her life's work and everything she does around advancing European institutional interests under the belief that this serves Black people. That 12-year-old little girl that was pushed down those stairs in an experiment, in an integration, grew up to spend her entire career, her life's work, believing that the experiment worked and that the way forward for her, and by extension, she believed for her community, was through the doors that integration opened, even when what walked back out of those doors was policy that undermined all of us, Black folks, and the very communities from which she came. But she doesn't seem to experience that contradiction. And the absence of that felt contradiction is exactly what Cambone's framework would call the condition. Her operating system is infected with that virus, the cultural misorientation virus, and is undetectable to her consciousness. She is completely unaware. So let's go into our second field study around Condoleezza Rice, who was born November 14th, 1954, and she's 71 years old now. She grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, which unfortunately was called Bombingham because it was during an era that there were repeated and documented bombings of Black homes, Black churches, and civil rights activists. Her childhood friend, Denise McNair, who was 11 at the time, was the youngest of four girls killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church on September 15th, 1963. Rice has spoken about this loss throughout her life, and she vividly remembers the bombing and the funerals that followed it. Her father, John Wesley Rice Jr., was a Presbyterian minister who, alongside other black men in their neighborhood, helped patrol their streets at night against white supremacist night risers. Ooh, child. He had connections to Birmingham's black civil rights leadership, and her parents supported the goals of civil rights movement, but they emphasized education, discipline, and individual excellence as their primary strategy for navigating segregation rather than direct activism. So by age 15, Rice was seriously studying piano. She had entered the University of Denver, and then by 26, she had a PhD. This was the twice as good message, which was common across many Black families of that generation. I get it. And one way to understand that strategy is that success became measured through mastery of institutions built outside of the Black community rather than through collective political transformation. And I want to be clear that's my interpretation of the pattern, not something that she has framed herself in those words. But it's one that I understand. I talk about that whole twice as good in what I call plantation proverbs in my first book, From Fat, Black, and Unlovable to Beautiful, Powerful Love. The link is in the description. But it plays out differently. Rice became the first Black woman to serve as the National Security Advisor and then the Secretary of State under George W. Bush. She was key in the Bush administration's case for invading Iraq. And that war was supposedly about weapons of mass destruction, which were found to be completely unfounded and killed hundreds of thousands of people. She's continued to defend that move and that removing Saddam Hussein was key, but she acknowledged that the post war planning and reconstruction were flawed. She's been asked about voting rights for Black people and the specific mechanisms that protect Black voters. And she said, well, it's on you to vote. Not these protections were built in blood, not this infrastructure matters, but it's on you. She is currently the director of the Hoover Institution at Stanford and part owner of the Denver Broncos. She's never married. She has no children. It's something that she's discussed publicly as a matter of never having met the right partner in the context of a life shaped by her own account, these are her words, around professional achievement and the pursuit of excellence that her parents instilled in her from childhood. Now that is it's a really interesting dynamic when we think about what success means. I can remember being a young grad student at a historically Black college. I went to Clark Lane University and I was in the MBA program, and we would have speakers, other Black professionals who had obviously gone on and were successful in their careers, come back to speak to us. And I remember very vividly there were a couple of Black women who were in corporate positions. I won't name the companies. They weren't companies that I would necessarily work for because they already do things that weren't of benefit for Black people. But these women said, as Black women going into corporate America, you have to approach it like corporate America is your daddy. Literally, this is what they said to us. You have to stroke the egos. You have to take care of that situation and your job and the people at your job. And hear me when I say daddy, they not talking about like daddy like your actual father. And this is coming from Black women. So this mindset of how we look at these systems that we're in, it gets passed down through us and between us, as I said at the beginning. So I understand this way of looking at things, and I'm just thankful that there was enough foundation within me where I didn't take that in. But here's Dr. Kambon's subscale that I want to highlight for Miss Rice. And it's the same one as James, but it looks completely different on her, and in many ways is more severe. It's that integration orientation. James' integration orientation was institutional, government roles, think tanks, board seats. Condoleezza Rice is total. She didn't go to a HBCU. She went to University of Denver, then Stanford. Her entire trajectory Provost of Stanford, National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, Hoover Institution. All of that represents integration into the absolute pinnacle of American institutional power. She has never, across that entire career, advocated for or built independent Black institutional power. Her framework for racial progress is integration as a rival. A Black woman in the White House Situation Room is the fulfillment of the promise in her mind, regardless of what that woman in that room then does with that power. And what she did with it, by her own account and the historical record, was help architect a war that devastated a country full of people like her own family in Birmingham decades earlier were living under the threat of bombs. She decided their suffering was an acceptable cost. Now just sit with that for a minute. A woman who survived Birmingham helped build a war that made another set of cities into Birminghams. The cognitive distance required to hold both of those truths without them touching each other, that is what Dr. Kambon's framework would call a deep expression of cultural misorientation, a worldview so thoroughly reoriented that the analogy between your own history and your own actions simply doesn't register. Generationally, Rice and James are only 5 years apart. Both came of age during the hot violence of legal segregation and the civil rights movement, documented terror, bombs, and their integration orientation was forged as an armor by parents and communities trying to keep their families and their children alive. That's the compassion piece. I'm not going to let go of that. But the armor doesn't come off just because the war that required it officially ended. The skin folk are infected with the cultural misorientation virus, and they are no longer kinfolk. The virus becomes the operating system, and an operating system will just run the virus until it's cleared. Take a deep breath and sip some water. Next, we're going to talk about Candace Owens, and we're going to go through all the subscales with her because they are severe. Hoo cha. Candace Owens, born April 29th, 1989. It's crazy. I graduated from high school in 89. She is 37 years old, and she was born in White Plains, New York, but she grew up in low income housing in a predominantly white neighborhood of Stamford, Connecticut. She was raised by her paternal grandparents from around age 11 after her parents divorced. Her grandfather, Robert, who was a Black man from North Carolina, and her grandmother from St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands were the ones who raised her. And at 17, she was a senior in high school, and she received racist death threat voicemails from white classmates, including the 14-year-old son of the town's mayor, who later, the mayor, later became Connecticut's governor. So scandals don't even matter. She missed 6 weeks of school out of fear for her life since the school did not take disciplinary action. Her family sued the school district because of this, and they received a settlement of about $37,000. She also has publicly discussed struggling with anorexia from ages 18 to 21, which she described in her own words as a response to childhood trauma and a way of asserting control over her own life. Before 2017, she ran a commentary website called Degree 180, where she publicly criticized Donald Trump and the Republicans, and she held views that were generally aligned with liberal and centralist politics. Then in August 2017, after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, where a woman was murdered by a white supremacist, y'all remember, she posted a video titled, "I don't care about Charlottesville, the KKK, or white supremacy." That video caught the attention of Alex Jones and some others at the extreme end of the far right media, not mainstream conservatism, but far right extremists. And by November of that year, Charlie Kirk had hired her as director of urban engagement. They always put us in the urban roles, don't they? Even in like corporate marketing, I'm just saying. But she was the director of urban engagement for Turning Point USA. And she would go on to become its director of communications. And then she founded the Blacksit Foundation, which was all about encouraging Black Americans to leave the Democratic Party. And she built one of the largest Black conservative media platforms in the country. You can point to the exact video, the exact month. That's how fast this turn happened. And here's the thing about Owens that makes her case so clear. Every single one of Kambon's 6 subscales shows up severely, and the timeline tells you exactly when and why. So let's go through them. Materialism orientation. It's high, it's severe. That's the frame that I think is the most defensible and the most damning, that and it doesn't require me to read anybody's mind. Owens experienced racism personally. She once publicly acknowledged racial discrimination through that lawsuit and through her own early commentary. Then she later adopted a political framework that minimizes structural racism, a framework that is completely at odds with the experience that she lived and once described. But there's a financial through line that makes this more than ideological. In 2020, during the protests after George Floyd's murder, the Blacksit Foundation took in over $7 million in donations, almost 7.5 million to be exact. And much of that came from wealthy white conservative donors. Owens publicly promised that money would go to Black owned businesses that were destroyed in the unrest. And that foundation's own tax filings show that just over $77,000 in grants went to 8 small businesses that year. Out of almost $7.5 million in donations, 77,000 went to 8 small businesses. Meanwhile, her salary from the foundation surpassed $250,000, with additional 6 figure spending on travel, some of it chartered flights, the grift. So by 2021, not 19, we're not going back in time, by 2021, donations had collapsed to about a third of that high in 2020, when people were filling away and they was just throwing money at the problem to try to feel a little bit better since things were getting broadcast. By 2021, the donations had went down, but she was still getting that big paycheck though. The grift was on. So that gap between what Blexit promised publicly and what its own filings show actually went to Black businesses is documented in the organization's own paperwork. That's not anybody's opinion of her, it's the actual data of what happened. And that sits alongside another larger contradiction. A woman who personally lived discrimination serious enough to sue over, building a career on the argument that discrimination isn't really the problem Black people face. That contradiction, that lived experience on one side, public messaging on the other side, that does all the heavy lifting needed to dismiss systemic racism, making it sound more credible coming from someone who can say, well, I went through it too and I don't buy it. They put a Black person, that Black woman's face, who literally has gone through it, to say it doesn't exist, it's not real, it's some BS. That serves the purpose of the white supremacist engine. Next subscale, individualism orientation, high for Owens. Her entire public philosophy is Black Americans are in the driver's seat of their own outcomes. Every disparity becomes an individual choice in her view. Every structural barrier becomes a victim mentality in her view. Dr. Kambon's framework names the African worldview's foundation as I am because we are. Owen's framework doesn't just lack that, it explicitly mocks it as a weakness. Child. Alien self orientation, that's the third subscale. Severe. No discernible connection to African cultural identity, institutions, spiritual or communal practices can be seen before or after her political shift. But her pre 2017 self showed more African self consciousness than her post 2017 self. And that's important. This wasn't who she always was, it's who she became because of the grift. Next subscale, anti self orientation, severe for her. This is her defining subscale. Critics contend that her messaging consistently reassures conservative audiences by emphasizing individual responsibility over structural explanations for racial inequality. She testified before Congress that white supremacy and white nationalism were not a problem that was harming Black Americans. She literally was called in by the Republican Party on more than one occasion to speak that on the record, to become the voice piece for white supremacy. She has faced a bunch of criticism from historians and Jewish organizations for comments that many viewed as minimizing aspects of Nazi ideology, comments that, whatever her intent, function as exactly the kind of anti self performance that Dr. Kambon's framework names. A Black person providing cover for the dismissal of documented harm. And that's her defining subscale, and it has only deepened in time. So in December 2018, while she was the Turning Point USA's communications director, she told a London audience that Hitler's plan for Germany was okay, fine, but the problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. Those comments were so damaging that Turning Point USA chapters publicly rebuked her, and she resigned the following year. She went too far. She testified before Congress again twice, both times invited specifically by Republican committee members as their witness to argue that white supremacy and white nationalism are not actually the problem facing Black America. She told lawmakers with her whole chest that the entire premise of hearings on hate crime violence was a Democratic election strategy. Whatever Candace Owens believes in her own heart, the pattern is consistent. A Black woman repeatedly positioned by white led institutions to argue that documented harm to Black Americans, to anyone that the hearing of the moment was actually about, isn't real, isn't serious, isn't worth the attention it's getting. That positioning and her willingness to feel it again and again is exactly what Dr. Kambon's anti self orientation names. Whew, child. Now, next subscale, self-destructive orientation. This is high for her. This is one that is personal. The anorexia that she's disclosed and talked about, 3 years of literal self-starvation, which she connected directly to her childhood trauma, is one of the clearest expressions of self-destructive orientation in this entire study. A body in pain trying to control itself through harm to itself. And at the platform level by 2026, after 9 years of being one of conservative media's most visible black faces, they didn't even have to put blackface on, she already had blackface. The woman who helped build the case that white nationalism wasn't a real problem, who helped build Blaxit, who helped build an entire brand around being the exception that proved the rule, Owens found herself on side of the same institutions and relationships she helped build. Tokens get spent. The man who first opened the door for her was gone, pew pewed. The doors he opened didn't stay open for her. Tokens get spent. Skin folk that betray their kinfolk, they don't have no kinfolk. You think that proximity is it, but they don't see you as one of them. You're not one of them. So you betray your own kinfolk. You still got that skin and you have no kin. And then the last subscale, which is the same one that is prominent for both Rice and for James, is that integration orientation. It's high for her too. She didn't build any Black institutions. She didn't attend HBCUs. The Blaxit Foundation, by design, moved Black people towards white majority political spaces rather than actually building independent Black power, which is a difference. When Owens herself became inconvenient to that same white conservative infrastructure, there was no independent base of her own to stand on. Tokens get spent. And here's the generational piece. So James' integration orientation was installed slowly across decades by institutions and a survival logic that was kind of forged in Jim Crow Richmond. Condoleezza Rice was installed even earlier in childhood by parents responding to bombs. Owen's transformation happened fast, visibly, traceably, in under 6 months, from a Charlottesville reaction video to a job offer from Charlie Kirk. That mechanism wasn't necessarily generational trauma slowly working its way through a family. It was a media economy that had figured out by late 2017 that a young Black woman willing to perform anti Blackness for white conservative audiences was extremely profitable, and that there were always be ways to find a next audience, the next controversy, the next seven-figure moment, right up until the platform decided it didn't need her anymore. Tokens get spent. And that's the evolution. It's the same virus. A new vector that didn't need generations to work on Owens. Capitalism did that shit in 6 months, in public for views, and then just as efficiently discarded her when she stopped being useful. Capitalism, racism, colonialism, patriarchy, it all goes hand in hand. So here's what I want you to see across all three of these women. James was born in 1949 and Rice born in 1954, 5 years apart. Both children of the Jim Crow South, both watched their families respond to documented racial terror, not with collective resistance, but with individual armor, excellence, integration, institutional access. And that armor was love, it was survival. It became the operating system that decades later put one of them at the head of an organization that produced Project 2025 and the other at the head of the State Department during the Iraq War. Owens, born 1989, 35 years later, in a country that had already won the legal battles James and Rice's parents couldn't fight directly or chose not to fight directly. There were no bombs, no legal segregation, and yet cultural misorientation still found her. Not through inherited family armor, through a capitalist media that discovered in real time that performing anti Blackness for a Black woman came with a price tag, and that price was worth paying. This cultural misorientation virus doesn't need slavery or Jim Crow to keep working. It just needs an environment where European centered values are rewarded and African centered ones are not. That environment didn't end in 1865 or 1965 or when Juneteenth finally came around. It just sticks around and it changes shapes. But here's where the compassion piece needs to come in. And I got to say this clearly. Every one of these women survived something: poverty, documented racial terror, personal trauma that was so significant that it manifested as an eating disorder. None of them chose as small children to have their orientation shaped by colonialism and slavery. It was done to them by history, by family, by the machine of capitalism and new media, racism, all the things. And then, as adults with power and platforms, they did things with that orientation that affected and continues to affect millions of people. Both of those things are true at the same time. Dr. Kambon named cultural misorientation as the greatest threat to the survival of the Black race in the 21st century. That's real. He also named it a virus planted through historical violence none of these women asked for. That's the compassion. But neither one of them cancels the other out. Ooh, cha. Take a deep breath. I want to come back to something that ran underneath all three of these women, although it showed up differently each time. Materialism orientation. What gets counted as winning? What gets rewarded? What gets called success? For James, it was institutional access, and institutional access pays, honey. For Rice, it was elite credentialing, and elite credentials pay. For Owens, it was the most direct version, a media economy that will hand a Black woman millions of dollars and tens of millions of followers specifically for telling white audiences that racism isn't real. But I don't want you to think that this only shows up in politics or only in people with that type of access and that type of platform. Think about Kevin Hart. Think about Nicki Minaj. Now, I am not here to drag anybody. They do that on their own through their own actions, and there are plenty of people on the interwebs that are much funnier at dragging them than I am. I'm just saying, look at who and what gets rewarded. That's the market working exactly the way Dr. Cambone said it would. The European survival thrust doesn't tell you to hate yourself explicitly. It just needs you to notice what gets you paid, what gets you promoted, what lets you in the room, what enables you to have the resources and access to care for your family, to support yourself, to feed your children. And it needs that lesson to be true often enough that you start making decisions based on that rather than clocking what you're actually doing, rather than understanding who you are and operating from that base versus what's going to get you the resources to be able to live in a capitalist world. Now, here's where I got to veer off script because I've been struggling for days to get this video made because there was more that wanted to come through. So I might just have to go off the dome with some of this. But I know at the root of it is a concept that I talked about in the Angry Black Woman video, the Rage video, but I talked about it in more in depth in the Ancestral Activation for Black Liberation, specifically during the Sacred Resistance Week, although it ran through all of the weeks of that. And it's this idea of love, courage, action. Now, clearly, internalized anti Blackness, as we've already talked about, is about self hatred at its most root, at its most basic level, self loathing. And so the antidote to any type of self hatred is love. But I don't want to just say, oh, all you got to do is love. All we need is love, because that is so can often feel so distant from us. How do we actually do that? How do we know when we're actually fully loving ourselves? And the reality is, it's fairly complex because what it means to love yourself is a you question. It's an inside game. It's something that you have to come to understand in yourself. I can give you some tools and tips and things that can lead you in that direction, some practices that can get you there. But ultimately, learning to love yourself unconditionally, unapologetically is the antidote. Understanding who you are and loving every aspect of you is the antidote. When you can love yourself, when you can love your family, your children, your community, your people, you see how that ripples out? But it starts with loving yourself, and then you can have the courage to not necessarily do what the society, what capitalism is telling you need to do in order to get money, in order to get resources. You can start to look at life in a different way, to throw off these shackles, throw off the mental shackles, the colonized mind shackles, to be able to see existence and life for what it really is, to see the abundance that is everywhere all the time, so you don't fall into at least that materialism subscale that gets us off track of being who we are and who we're born to be. Love is at the foundation of all of that. And honestly, it starts with loving yourself. And right now, I'm talking to Black women. This applies to all Black people, but I am talking to Black women in films because we are the first teachers in the household. We are the caregivers for the family. We are the community leaders in many ways. When we can know who we are and love ourselves, so many things can get healed and solved as a ripple effect from that, because we are the ones they go for. I'm going to make a different video to talk more about the Heritage Foundation and why the first woman and the first African American was an African American woman that they made president of the Heritage Foundation, right before hiring someone who has a whole PhD in studying Black Americans, African Americans, and identifying that it's the matriarchal connection that sustained us during slavery. There's a reason for that, but I need you as a Black woman in film to understand it within your own life, within your own body, within your own reality, what it means to love yourself in an environment, in a culture, in a world, in a country. And it's not even, I say world first because it's not just in the United States, although in many ways this is like ground zero, but it affects Black and brown women and femmes all over the planet. They target us because we are the key to liberation. Again, we're going to go into more detail about this, but the medicine I want you to take away from this cultural misorientation, this internalized anti-Blackness, this pivot towards materialism, which is rampant for us right now because they're taking away so many resources and avenues to be able to care for yourself and your family, that it will cause many of us to do things that are out of our character, that are not in alignment with who we are in order to sustain ourselves. The antidote to all of that is learning and understanding how to love yourself. And again, there's many pathways, many things, and it's probably going to take many things in order to heal that, because the reality is all of us have some degree of internalized anti-Blackness. You don't want to hear it, it's hard to swallow, but living in this world, on this planet, some degree of it is there. It may be minuscule, it may be undetectable, but your mission is to root it out and find it within yourself, to be able to recognize it within yourself. Hell, to be able to recognize it in someone in your community so that you can either pull their card if they're not too far gone and bring them back in, or understand that they are no longer kinfolk and operate accordingly. You need to be able to recognize the anti-Blackness when it shows up within yourself, then you can understand it when it shows up within others. So that's part of the medicine. The other part, going back to the love, courage, action, is the loving yourself. For me, again, writing has always been the thing. Writing has been the go to. I can rewrite my story, I can rewrite and reprogram my own mind. I can rewrite that script, that operating system software that's operating up here to eradicate that virus, that cultural misorientation virus, that internalized anti Blackness virus. I can use the word, the written word, the spoken word to change and shift my beliefs and thoughts. And so I bring you to a thing that I have done, that I do ongoingly, is I write letters to myself. I write love letters to myself. And I encourage you to do this and take your time with it. Write a love letter to every aspect of yourself, whether it's your physical form, which sometimes can be the easiest because all you got to do is look at yourself, but also the hardest because we have been also taught to hate the way we look in many ways. Even if it's not about how you look as a Black woman or femme, but just how you look as a Black woman and fair compared to another Black woman or femme. I mean, again, this capitalist world that we live in has us feeling unworthy in many ways, and you have to take that back. So writing a letter to all the different parts of your body, your appearance that you love, that you like, find it. Take your time in the mirror, take your time with yourself to find it. Not what someone else likes about you, but what you love and like about yourself. Other people can come into the picture later on, but right now this is about you and you. What you like about how your mind works. If you neurospicy, you got a lot to like about that. What do you love and like about how you feel, how deeply you love? Now, this is where other people can come into play, because I know for myself, I couldn't understand love from myself until I understood love from my children. That's when I really started to understand, oh my God, I got to show up. I got to grow. I got to be. But even without having children, where does love show up for you and your emotions? Even if it's, damn, I really love how pissed off I get at injustice. Now, we know that it's love that's underneath that pissed offness, but maybe you just love the way you get pissed off and how you move and how you think when you get pissed off. And maybe you love your own way of honoring the divine, whether it's in nature, in church, in your own self, because you too are divine. As you can see, I'm going through the four planes as a simplified way of looking at different aspects of you to write love letters to. You write the love letters. Physically write, pen on paper, that's a thing. You can also put it in your phone, notes, and you can also voice record, speak it. I would do all three because all three are hitting you at different points and different avenues and different ways and entry points. And I have done all three. I started recording meditations and affirmations for myself before I ever recorded anything to put on YouTube. I started writing love letters from myself before I wrote the email course, Love Letters from the Ancestral Mothers. In a lot of ways, when I was writing for myself, it was ancestral mothers writing to me as well. That's where the idea and the concept of it came from for me because it was what was working for me. So writing love letters to yourself and taking your time with it and updating it and recording it, and maybe it's just a little love note to yourself, and I'm talking about get into it just like you would if you were in love with that man or that woman or that person, that being. Write that love letter to yourself like you confessing all the love in the world, like you love Jones and baby. Write love into your DNA. It's there. You writing it is going to bring it back. It's going to amplify it. It's going to elevate it. Written, typed, spoken. All three. The power of the word. You got this. So that's one. And as I already mentioned, the love letters from the ancestral mothers. Go ahead and sign up for that. Because in that, we're going to go through the seven portals, the seven aspects of yourself that our ancestral mothers left for us. It's the same seven portals that are in my activity book, Remember Who the Fuck You Are. But you can start off with the free email course by just signing up for that, and you get the seven emails to take you through. There's some audio involved in it. I send you audio. You send me replies, and I reply back to you because I want Black women and femmes to get this. I know that we are at the foundation of what is required for Black people to finally and fully get free. And I know Black people fully and finally getting free frees the planet. So the letters, love letters from the ancestral mothers, the activity book is going to be something that can help you sustain that work and go deeper with that work and go broader with that work. And if you want to go even further deeper, I do one-on-one sessions that takes you through whatever aspect of those portals that you need to go through. Whether it's going deep on one portal or we need to talk about it multiple different things, we design that session to support you. And then there's more offerings and things that we'll get into. But before you even get into any of that, first, you, pen and paper, your phone, your audio, you write love letters to you because no one, no thing, no system, no anything can heal you, can bring you back, can love you the way you can. That's all the other tools are trying to get to awaken within you is you. So start there, write love letters to yourself, sign up for love letters from the ancestral mothers, get the activity book, Remember Who the Fuck You Are, and then let's talk in a one-on-one and really help you get further and deeper into it. That's the medicine. And that's why I had to go off strip because they had some things to say. And yes, I said strip, script. Take a deep breath with me, y'all. Because listen, we got more. I want to thank you for staying with me through this one. Child, listen, it asks something of you. And I know that discomfort, whatever subscale it was attached to, that was your own African self consciousness recognizing itself, your own self recognizing itself. The part of you that the fallacy of white supremacy and colonialism and enslavement and patriarchy and imperialism didn't fully erase. And it's reaching back and it's coming forward to bring back what your higher self, what you already know. Follow that feeling. Drop in the comments. Let me know what you're feeling right now. What's hard for you? What's easy for you? What do you agree with or not agree with? I want to hear from you. I want to hear from Black women and femmes. That's who I want to hear from. What landed for you? What activated something in your body? And I hope that you all are going to write the love letters to yourself. I hope you actually do it, and let me know how that turned out for you. What did it feel like? I remember the first time I wrote a love letter to myself. I felt some kind of way. In a good way. It felt uncomfortable, but it also felt good. It felt like something that had just been sitting there for a while was finally getting charged up. But the thing is, we live in this environment and in this world that's constantly coming for us. So it has to be an ongoing thing. And I want to support you in it. I want to hear about it. Share this video with a Black woman who's ready to look at herself, who's ready to see herself. And then subscribe, ring the bell, make the comments, do all the things. Y'all, Juneteenth is a coming, and we still have work to do to get free. This time we know about it. And this time we know we're not fully free. We see it very clearly. The fact that this Jim Crow resurgence, this Project 2025, all these things are right here attempting to undo all that our ancestors have done to get us to this point. We already know that we're not free. There's more work to be done. And this time it's internal. It's external too, but it's internal. I'm going to stop before I just go into a whole other video. I just want to say, as always, until next time, please take good care of you. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.